Hello, so our group members include Anshika, Jayalakshmi, Sandeepna, and myself, Saina. So today we'll be discussing the policy document of the curriculum of Delhi University of the course BA English Honours. So let's start with the introduction. And so today we will be critically examining the curriculum of the BA English course of the University of Delhi, which was effective from the academic year 2011 to 2012. So, when we look at a literature syllabus, we often see it as just a structured list of texts that students need to study. But in reality, a syllabus plays a much larger role. It decides which voices are considered important, which histories are preserved, and which cultural experiences are treated as central to knowledge. Education is never completely neutral. The selection of text reflects historical power structures and academic traditions and institutional decisions. So, when we analyze the syllabus, we are actually examining how knowledge is organized and whose perspectives are prioritized. In this presentation, we will critically examine the syllabus focused on the colonial canon. We will explore questions of knowledge bias, inclusion and exclusion, the politics behind canon formation, ethical concerns in teaching this text, and the impact this has on marginalized groups. Our aim is not to reject the syllabus entirely, but to understand its implications and possibilities for improvement. Now, let's understand the colonial canon. The colonial canon refers to literary works that have historically been regarded as classics in English literature, many of which were written during the colonial period by the European authors. So these texts became central to academic institutions not only in Europe but also in colonized countries. Over time, they were presented as models of literary excellence and universal human experience. However, it is important to remember that these works were produced within specific historical contexts shaped by imperial expansion and colonial power. The issue is not that these texts should be removed. They are important for understanding literary traditions and colonial ideology. The concern arises when they dominate the syllabus without adequate representation of other perspectives. And when one tradition consistently appears as the foundation of knowledge, it can unintentionally marginalize other literary and cultural voices. If we look at the actual BA English Honours syllabus, foundational texts like Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen and Hard Times by Charles Dickens are part of the core reading list. These works stem from European literary traditions and have long been considered central to literary study. Next, we have Eurocentrism and canon dominance. Eurocentrism refers to viewing the world primarily through European perspectives and treating those perspectives as universal or superior. In literature, this happens when Western authors and experiences are positioned at the center of the syllabus, while non-Western or indigenous texts are treated as supplementary or optional. This creates an intellectual hierarchy. Students may begin to see Western literature as the standard by which all other literatures are measured. Local traditions, regional voices, and marginalized narratives may appear secondary or less important. This dominance is not accidental, it is historically connected to colonial education systems that defined what counted as legitimate knowledge. When such structures continue without reflection, they reinforce old power dynamics. So, recognizing Eurocentrism does not mean dismissing Western texts, but rather questioning why they hold such dominant space and how the syllabus can become more balanced and inclusive.
Hello, I'm Sandeepna and I will be taking care of the next 3 slides. In this slide, which talks about representation gaps and inclusion-exclusion in the syllabus that we're discussing, we get to see that marginalized voices such as Dalit literature, tribal narratives, queer perspectives, and working class experiences are either completely absent, minimally present, or come way later on in the syllabus. This establishes the fact that Indian literature is introduced in the later half, where the 20th century Indian writing appears after students study multiple British literary periods. This also suggests that Western canon is treated as foundational and the local writing is sort of a secondary addition. And in the next example, we can see that when we treat canon as core. So the early papers that the students focus on is British literature authors such as Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, who wrote Pride and Prejudice, Charles Dickens, who wrote Hard Times. Meanwhile, the Dalit, tribal, and the regional marginalized voices are completely absent. Even if they are present, they come much later on. Why this matters is because this creates a sort of academic hierarchy. The colonial literature is treated as foundational, where the marginalized knowledge is treated as something supplementary or peripheral. The placement in the electives itself or in the later semester signals that they have lower academic priority. When we talk about exclusion, it's not only the canonical and the non-canonical texts that we can analyze. We can also analyze the gender bias and the patriarchal knowledge structure that this syllabus follows. This slide focuses on the gender bias within the syllabus. The curriculum reflects patriarchal literary traditions where male authors dominate most of the core canon. For instance, we can see that foundational writers like William Shakespeare, John Milton, and Charles Dickens are included as core. In contrast, women's writing only appears as optional papers in semesters 5 and 6. This means that students can complete most of their degree without even deeply engaging with women's literary voices, which excludes the women literary diaspora from the main and core syllabus. The structure therefore reinforces the idea that male literature is central, while women's perspectives are merely supplementary. Next, we talk about the politics of knowledge production itself. This slide basically examines knowledge bias within the syllabus, particularly the dominance of the colonial canon as discussed. Knowledge bias happens when central cultural traditions are treated as universal while all the others are seen as secondary. For example, we can see that the early compulsory curriculum focuses heavily on the canonical text, as discussed earlier, such as Shakespeare, Milton, Wordsworth, and they are presented as foundational literary figures. In contrast, the Indian and post-colonial literature itself appears later in the program. This creates an implicit hierarchy again, where Western knowledge is considered core and non-Western knowledge becomes supplementary. This also means to say that the politics of knowledge in this case operates in a way which treats anything that relates to Western knowledge production is important, imperative, while the others are not as important. This structure reflects the continued influence of colonial academic traditions in modern education. Now handing over to Anshika.
Moving on to the ethical concerns in teaching colonial text. When we teach colonial literature, the challenge isn't the texts themselves but how we frame them. Colonial works often carry the assumptions, prejudices, and work structure of the time they were written in. If we don't guide students to question these elements, the classroom can unintentionally reproduce the same ideas the texts were built on. That means students may observe racial stereotypes, ideas of cultural superiority, or see colonialism as something neutral or even justified. This is why critical framing is essential. We need to help students see whose voices were highlighted and whose were erased. Instead of treating these works as objective truth, we have to place them in conversation with the historical violence or silenced perspectives behind them. So basically, ethical teaching isn't about removing colonial text, it's about making space for critique, context, and alternative viewpoints. That way, students learn to read these texts responsibly, not passively. Talking about accessibility and structural inequality. When we talk about accessibility in education, we usually think of resources or technology, but the issue goes much deeper. Many students face barriers that are built into the structure of the academic system itself. For instance, complicated theoretical language can make learning overwhelming, especially for first generation or multilingual students. Texts and discussions are often centered around urban or Western experiences, which leaves out rural or marginalized learners who don't see the realities reflected in the curriculum. Access to books, digital tools, and basic learning materials also varies drastically depending on income. Because of this, students who already have fewer resources end up having to work twice as hard just to keep up. These systemic inequalities don't just affect performance, they affect confidence, participation, and long-term engagement. That's why an inclusive curriculum must consider economic background, linguistic diversity, and resource differences. Without that, education continues to privilege some groups over others. Moving on to impact on marginalized groups. Curriculum choices don't just influence what students learn, they shape how students see themselves and how they understand society. For marginalized communities, the impact happens across several levels. Psychologically, when students don't see themselves represented, it affects their sense of identity and belonging. They may feel that their culture or history is less important or less valuable. Intellectually, When the curriculum includes only a limited set of voices, students lose out on a broader, more critical view of the world. Diverse perspectives are essential for critical thinking, and without them, understanding becomes narrow. Culturally, dominant narratives often overshadow indigenous or minority histories, which erases authentic knowledge systems. Socially, when the education system mirrors existing inequalities, it ends up reinforcing societal hierarchies rather than challenging them. So, the impact is not just academic, it shapes psychological well being, cultural recognition, social empowerment, and intellectual growth. A more inclusive curriculum isn't just about fairness, it directly influences how students experience and navigate the world.
Now, this is Jayalakshmi Rao taking over. While reform is necessary, the existing syllabus also has some strengths. In this slide, we are going to discuss about the strengths of the existing syllabus. It introduces historically influential texts, foundational literary theories, and develops strong analytical skills. It enables students to understand colonial history as well as global power structures. Colonial texts themselves are not the problem. They're vital for understanding historical dominance as well as ideological systems. The concern lies in imbalance, when one perspective dominates and others are structurally excluded. Recognizing these trends ensures that reform is constructive, not reactionary. Our aim is expansion, not erasure. Balance, not replacement. Slide. We propose key steps towards a more inclusive curriculum. We are going to talk about recommendations for a more inclusive framework. Curriculum diversification integrates marginalized writers into core modules, not just electives. Counter-narrative pairing reads colonial texts alongside resistant writings to encourage critical comparison and to create a dialogue between power and history. Intersectional representation includes voices across gender, caste, class, sexuality, and disability to reflect social realities more accurately. Teacher training prepares educators to address power and inequality responsibly and with accountable behavior. Accessibility measures ensures affordable and digitally accessible learning resources. Participatory curriculum design involves students and marginalized scholars in a syllabus review. These reforms promote a more balanced and ethical educational framework. Finally, moving towards the conclusion slide. In conclusion, I would like to mention that a syllabus is never neutral. It reflects power, priorities, and values. When certain voices dominate, others are pushed into silence, and education becomes a tool of exclusion rather than empowerment. If we truly believe in critical thinking and academic integrity, then we must be willing to question the structures that shape knowledge itself. An inclusive and critically balanced curriculum does not dilute excellence. It deepens it by expanding perspectives and challenging comfort zones. Education should not reproduce inequality. It should disrupt it. Therefore, reforming the curriculum is not merely an academic adjustment. It is a moral commitment to justice, representation, and intellectual honesty. Thank you.